I am from Hungary. I started here hacking on writer, RTF import and export, and today we will talk about something a little bit more challenging, multi-page floating tables. So the feature we are talking about is a combination of two existing features, and it was not possible to combine these together, but people wanted this and wanted this for years, and finally the need and the funding abilities met, and now this work has started. So what you see on the screen is you can have a table which spans over multiple pages depending on how the content wants that to happen. So here you can have a table with 3 rows. The top row is entirely on page 1. The second row is split, and the third row is entirely on page 2. And how exactly that split happens on the second row is determined by the layout. So we start filling in the row on the first page. We determine that the row itself can't grow further. So we turn that row to a frame which we call the master frame. We create a follow frame for them. And then we continue filling in the last column with content. And we realize that all the content is there, so we can place the third row with content there. Now, another thing you might want to have is not to span over multiple pages, but to have a table which is inside a frame, a floating frame, and then you can have some body text wrapping around the table. This might make sense in documents which are more looking like brochures or something like that. And in the unfortunate case that you want to combine these together, both multi-page tables and floating tables, then you can't really have that because writer text frames are limited to a single page only. So that was basically the task. And I will go to some more details how that now starts to work, but still how it looks on the UI. That's very easy, it's just a checkbox. You can already have various properties for an existing text frame, and in case the text frame contains exactly one table, no additional content before or after, no other table, just a single table, then there is some additional UI where you can mark that text frame to be allowed to span over multiple pages. There are important export filters for this. The big switch will be when the docx import will start using this feature, because that's all this document corpus from crash testing described by KLM will actually start to exercise this feature, which may or may not find additional problems. So at the moment the docx import is behind some feature flag, but otherwise that's implemented. But how exactly this is working? So this is the high-level overview of how this layout thing is working. What we need is, for each and every floating frame, we need to provide some anchor points. Writer has a concept of two-page anchoring, which is a nightmare from the word import and export point of view. So using that feature to help emulating some word feature sounds like a plan which will lead the whole project to the ground very quickly. Not a good idea. Let's do something better. What we can do is that there is always some body text after at the end of the document. Even if your document would normally have just a single table, it's guaranteed that there will be an empty paragraph after that. So we can depend on that. What we can also do is that a paragraph can flow over multiple pages, so we can map a single text node to multiple text frames. So that means we split the text node to multiple text frames. Now we can do the splitting in a way that we split before the very first character in the paragraph, which means that we do a split, but the first frame in this anchor chain don't really contain anything. That's exactly what we want, because that's how Word lays out their documents. So what you see there is that on the first page there is an invisible anchoring point, and on the second page there is the same anchor, but with the actual content, with the body text, and that wraps around the frame and so on. So there is a chain of anchor points. which means that the layout can decide how many pages it needs for the table. We will do as many anchor points, and then we will have some positions to anchor these split table frames. Now the second complexity is that we could already have chained frames in Writer. You had to create them manually, so they were not that fancy. But something like this was possible to flow content from one frame to another. But to make the code simple, it was a requirement that all of these frames in the chain have a fixed height, and only the very last frame is allowed to have an automatic height. Now this is exactly what's needed here. It has to be automatic, so the first table will have some automatic height based on what's the available space, and then it will flow to the second page, and then there again it will have an automatic height, which means that we again break an existing variant where lots of existing code had the ability to depend on that invariant, because we know this will never change, and now we change it. And we knew that frames can't be multiple pages, so we break that. Then we knew that in case there is a chain of these text frames, then only the last frame will have an automatic height. We also break that. So what's left? We have this parallel structure, so that we have a chain of anchors and we have a chain of table frames. That's working reasonably well. It's really hard to get this out of sync. You know that if you ever did some kind of programming, in case we have parallel structures, then sooner or later these will get out of sync and something will blow up. But so far it is possible to control these in just two places where we when we read these chains and when we set these chains, and so far that's not yet getting out of sync. So that's not as risky as breaking the first two invariants. Then another win is that luckily Word only wraps content around the last frame in case of multi-page table. So that means that we can do the table layout, figure out how many pages we need, and we need to go back to the start of the very last page only, which makes the whole layout calculation easier. We never need to go back and then put some text over the previous pages, which would sooner or later definitely create some kind of loop which is not wanted. The last complexity that's visible here is that, well, not really visible here, but I will tell you about it, is that on the first page, you can have some vertical offsets for these frames. Like you can start a table which is near the bottom of the page. But in case you jump to the next page to lay out the remaining content, then you probably don't want to start on the very bottom of the page, because then you will have a single row for each page, and 20 rows and 20 pages, that's not really great. So you can define a vertical offset for these tables, but that will be respected on the very first page, and all the other pages will start at the page top, which gives us basically three cases. There will be a special first page, which will have the vertical offset. There will be this the last page, which will have the content body content wrapped around the table, and there will be the boring inner cases, which are neither first neither last. That's mostly it. Until you discover that the Hello World document submitted like 10 years ago to the TD of Bugzilla is actually a special legacy mode of Word where everything works differently. So then you go back and figure out like what's needed there. Basically, what they had, there is a good reason why this is legacy mode, because the current default in Word is at least something you can understand. As you play with the document, remove content, add content, you understand that why it's splitting between pages. And in their legacy mode, sometimes it was possible to bleed into the footer area, but not always, depending on how you size and position your frames. That's quite tricky. So as a summary, what we have is we have a good start for this feature. Lots more work is needed. At the moment, in case you want to play with that, then you need to opt in to try it out. And we still need to figure out lots of parts in Writer, how that interacts. What about footnotes? What about RTL layout? What about vertical layout? And so on, and so on, and so on. There is sizable list of what needs looking, but it seems like it's on track and it has the right direction. So that's where we are. Thanks.